Good morning, everyone. I cannot see myself on screen, but I guess everything is. I can see some documents on screen. I hope you can see me. I'm the Consul General of France in New York. I'm not in my office today, but I believe you can see some part of my office behind me. This is the magic of the Zoom days. I'm really pleased to open the third third session of our annual Women in Business conference. And I would like, first of all, to thank the Economic Club of New York, to thank Barbara and to thank Marie-Josèe Kravis. Without you, this will not be possible. And this is a very important annual conference, and thanks to you, this is very fruitful and always very positive. I also want to thank our colleagues from the Consulate General of Canada. It's an excellent partnership at ministerial level, as we saw our ministers open the conference a few hours ago, and this is it's becoming a rendezvous in March, which is that our ministers will not miss at all. I would like to just briefly to speak about the discussion that you will be listening to, but obviously you will be listening to the real specialist. But I think what's very important is that we have had 4 editions of the Women in Business. And yet, last year we spoke a lot about the effect of the pandemic, but this year we are focusing on the effects of the pandemic on the woman, and especially on the woman workforce. And I think we all, and this is what you're going to hear from our panelists, some women have benefited from the shift to remote working, to more remote working during the pandemic. Some women have benefited from the flexibility that we have gained, and maybe some women have also been better paid. But we know also that many women have suffered a big deal with the regressive consequences of the pandemic. And this is all that we will talk about today, because there are winners, like in every crisis. You have winners and losers. And you have people who benefit from the opportunities of the crisis, and some people who are sadly deeply affected. So to discuss that, we have a very high-level panel reflecting the diversity of our 3 countries. First of all, from the USA, I welcome Marie-K. Henry. She's the international president of the 2nd Million Member Service Employees International Union of the USA, which is a very large union. I mean, 2 million members. This is very significant. I also welcome Dawn Desjardins. She's the Vice President and Deputy Chief Economist at the Royal Bank of Canada. And despite you joined the RBC Economics team in January 2006, and you were a key contributor to the macroeconomics forecast for Canada and for the US, and you will be very well placed to enlighten us during this session. And to end with to balance this panel, it's very interesting. We have a representative of the union, a representative of the Royal Bank of Canada, and a representative of the MEDEF International, which is the French Business Council, is our main business council, actually our sole business council of France. You are Vice President and Director for International Affairs of this MEDEF. And you're also a senior executive businessman, chairman of a French company called BRICS Access, which promotes a partnership between European companies and their counterparts. And obviously, I'm talking about Gerard Wolf, that I welcome very much. Merci beaucoup, Gerard, pour votre présence. And to facilitate this wonderful panel, I am pleased to introduce and soon give the floor to Rachana Saoudjani. Rachana started fighting for women's rights and empowerment many years ago. and you decided to start where it all begins, the education of girls and women. And you created a nonprofit called Girls Who Code to promote science and computer science education among girls. So now, Reshma, the floor is yours, and I wish you all a wonderful panel discussion. Thank you. Merci.
Merci. Thank you so much. I have been looking forward to this conversation all week. We have such esteemed panelists who are really going to learn a lot. We always say women are in crisis right now across the globe, and this is a critical problem for us to figure out how to solve, to get women back into the workforce and to make sure that the workforce actually finally works for them. I want to welcome the audience to this panel and encourage you to put all of your questions into the chat box. So I want to start with a question for all of our panelists. We've seen how women's labor force participation has been greatly impacted by the pandemic. Can you give us a recap of what the impact has been to date, especially in regards to the communities that you work with? Why don't we start with you, Dawn?
Thank you. Thank you. It's such a great pleasure to be here today to talk about what's been happening. You know, we looked at Canada's labor market and well, I guess, I don't know if we call it the response, but certainly once the pandemic hit, how it had such a significant impact on women. You know, women make up about 47% of the employment in Canada, yet the hit in the early days was about 51% of the 3 million jobs lost. So it was like very, very dramatic. And we also saw the participation rate of women in our economy fall to a 30-year low. So, you know, we were making great strides. I tell this story often because I think it's so kind of ironic, I guess. We had just put out a report in early March 2020 lauding how well women had done in the labor market and their financial security having picked up so significantly. And of course, 2 weeks later, you know, everything was upended. And of course, this was particularly true for people who are working in certain services industries. Right away, women were the majority of some of those industries. Of 3 of the top 5 losers in terms of jobs, women were overly represented there. And of course, we saw a lot of mothers step back. So the so-called she recession was born. Now, if we move back to today, you know, things in Canada are better. We certainly have seen the participation rate of prime-aged women, so women 25 to 54, we've seen their participation rate hit an all-time high in recent months. So that's been great. Younger women also, you know, we're seeing them come back to the labor market. Where we are seeing gaps, there's a few of them, but one is that more mature workers. So workers who are 55 years and older, women, you know, are not coming back into the labor market. In fact, you know, there's the demographics with retirements, but we also see that a lot of these women have lost a job due to business conditions. So, you know, there's a gap there. We look at women, mothers with children, young children, you know, twice as many of those women are still out of work compared to the number, their partners. So, you know, these are big numbers. Service sector workers, as I'm sure Marie-Josèe will talk a lot too, you know, lots of those women continuing to be out of work, in particular, of course, in those close contact service industries. And it's not so much necessarily people who are working in healthcare or education. It's more people who are working in, you know, hospitality, lower paid, and in many cases, the data suggests lower educated women really still on the sidelines. So I'll leave it there and pass it over to our other panelists.
Gerard, would you like to also provide a little bit of, you know, what the impact has been and with regards to the communities that you work with?
Rashim, are you talking to me?
Marie-Josèe, we can go with you. I had said Gerard, but we can go with you first.
No. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Gerard.
Yes, good morning in New York and good afternoon here in Europe. I think the situation of the pandemic is completely different whether you talk about developed countries or developing countries. And as I'm in charge of international, I've seen both within MEDEF, as the Jérémy said before, the MEDEF International is about 70% of all French companies, and I'm in charge of international, one of the guys in charge of international. But let's begin with France. I think in France, it's roughly the same thing that Dawn said just before me, in the sense that people, I would say, in business wouldn't be differently impacted, whether they're men or women, except in some of in some sectors, in particular in health care, whether you talk about doctors or nurses or whoever in this sector, because we have a lot of women in this sector, like all countries, and they have been certainly affected by the number of things they had to do, of course. But I think it didn't really change their lives. Certainly, it's a good thing in a sense, because people realize that these working forces in health cannot work if ladies are not there, which is always, I think, a good thing. But it didn't completely change the equilibrium in France, which is not the case on the international basis, because I think, and I won't be long on that one, but very often when we discuss about things like that, this type of issues in Europe, we consider that whether you talk about Germany or England or whoever, we're all roughly the same, which again, in developing countries is not the same, because the reality is that the women had more to do. And for once, normally in a lot of African countries, Latin America countries, also Asia, I would say they had less responsibilities, except that this pandemic showed everybody, even in these countries, how women are important. And as you know, France is very, I would say, good in terms of business in these countries, in all what we call the essential services: water, sanitation, transportation, energy, etc. And we saw in our companies how people in some countries of Africa or in Latin America discovered, if I can say so, how much important were the ladies operating in these companies, and very often in real responsibility business. This is good news, I think, and it's not only for the business, but also in responsibilities as a subnational, sub-sovereign, as we say with finance situation for mayors or governors. You have more and more mayors, feminine mayors. Well, you have one in Montreal avec Valérie, but you have in Paris, you have in Bogota, you have in Mexico, you have in a lot of countries, new lady mayors. And the very interesting thing for us companies is to see that these ladies mayor were much more, how can I say, operational on, finding the right solution for these essential services. Because on the same time they are mayors, they are mothers or grandmothers sometimes, and they know more about the day-to-day life, and pandemic was about dealing the solutions with day-to-day issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerard. Yeah, it's very fascinating, Dawn. I want to dig in deeper with you on some of the numbers that you get. I mean, I know I'm going to tee you up, Mary Kay, but it's such a different story here in the United States, where it's really that women are in crisis. I mean, still 2 years later, we have 1.1 million that are missing. The latest job numbers that came out show that Black women have actually had the highest unemployment rate. The Great Resignation here is being actually driven by women who are quitting, double the rate of men. And we have a mental health crisis when it comes to mothers here in terms of anxiety and depression rates skyrocketing. So I'd love for you, Mary Kay, to set up the situation here, because I think it's a huge contrast to what we just heard.
Yes, I agree. And I also wanted to widen the lens to think about the Black, Brown, Indigenous, Asian, and immigrant women who never dropped out of the workforce. I would say at the beginning of the pandemic, their hours were drastically reduced and they had to scramble to piece together their income. But I tell the story of Thomasine Wilson, who is a Black home care worker. She's provided services to elders in their homes for 3 decades. She earns $9 an hour and she has no paid sick leave. She organized inside of her union to get 5 days of paid sick leave from the state of Virginia for the second year of the pandemic, and was able to return to work full time. And there's a Latina woman who led in McDonald's as a fast food worker, because McDonald's expanded their drive-through services so that hours were reduced initially, but then expanded for workers. She contracted COVID on the job in May of 20, when her store experienced an outbreak because the employer was not providing personal protective equipment or deep cleaning in between shifts. And then it impacted 24 workers and their family members, including a 10-month-old infant. And so she led one of the longest strikes in McDonald's history. And there's now a first in its kind worker safety council that gives workers input into safety measures. And so I think, Reshma, along with the Great Resignation, many women workers are on the front lines of essential sectors like home care, childcare, fast food, hospitality, across the economy saying enough is enough. We're fed up. People banged pots because we continued to work during the pandemic and called us essential, but we feel like we're being treated as disposable, both by our government and by employer policies. Now, there's wonderful exceptions, but it's not the rule. And I think that volatility of women both having to drop out of the workforce or scratch to string together multiple jobs is what I wanted to lift up as the condition in the US, that from the care workforce, Starbucks, Amazon, McDonald's, to tech workers, to even professional athletes, women workers are continuing to seize their power because they're fed up, because they don't want to be treated as disposable by employers and corporations, and refuse to return to the normal that existed for women workers pre-pandemic and create the new normal that all women workers deserve in this economy and democracy.
Thank you, Mary. I want to come back to you on some solutions because I think you have some great ideas we're going to talk about. Dawn, I want to come back to you. So you noted something fascinating, which is that the position of women, I think you said between 25 and 55 or 28 and 55, has increased, grown beyond pre-pandemic levels. I found that fascinating because that also includes women that are in their childbearing age or are women of younger children, which is not the case here in the United States, where you're seeing childless women account for much of the recovery of women, but mothers still being held back, and the need to kind of talk about it. So I laugh because on my Instagram feed, everybody wants to move to Canada. Everybody like, that's where the paid leave is. That's where the affordable childcare is. That's where, so, but I'd love for you to actually talk about, again, how those support structures that exist in Canada may have accounted for this.
Well, it's true that overall, but it is similar in Canada. Women who have young children are still not working. They're working at lower levels than prior to the pandemic. Not, I don't think, nearly as dramatic a number as in the United States and other countries. I mean, certainly we do have, childcare, and in the province of Quebec, they do already have affordable, accessible childcare programs in place. So what our government is doing here is saying, hey, this is a model. And what's interesting about that is when Quebec, they announced that in 1997. So this is not brand new for that province. And it did take probably about 8 years before the participation rate of women in Quebec was the same as participation rate in the rest of Canada. But then it continued to exceed. So obviously having accessible care that's affordable, because certainly if you're working in some of these lower wage industries, you still need to be able to afford the childcare. I mean, you might have access to it, but if it's extraordinarily expensive, it's certainly putting you far ahead. So yes, overall, the population of women in terms of our participation in the labor market, as well as jobs, is above, but there is still this period. So as we go forward, I think the one thing we're trying to look at it with our research is to say, yeah, this is great and it's good and it's going to happen. Once we can find childcare, early learning educators who can take on these roles. But even having said that, it probably will take some time, before we really get to that increase in participation rates right across the whole country.
Thank you for that. Mary Kay, turning to you next. Month over month, as we discussed, we're seeing incredible job growth, right? But when you actually dig in deeper to the data, you realize, as you talked about, that Black, Latina, Asian women are nowhere close feeling this recovery equitably. So is this a moment? We know what's happening in Washington in terms of the bill formerly known as Build Back Better, but is there a moment for the private sector, for workers, to come together and really, build the workplaces back better than they were before? Because even though we were 51% of the pandemic, most women of color, immigrants, my parents are refugees, we were barely hanging on.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a moment. We've seen a historic uprising of working people being led by women across all sectors who are demanding respect us, protect us, and pay us. And they're demanding that our government and employers come together and create solutions. One that our union obviously thinks is a key thing is to empower women to be able to join together in organizations and bargain directly with their employers so that an economy that never worked for us before the pandemic can get designed based on women's needs and thinking through collective bargaining and unions. And I do agree that there's key elements of Build Back Better, what Dawn just spoke to, affordable, accessible childcare and paid leave, for God's sake, that Canada and France have as standards that don't exist. People were shocked, I think, during the pandemic. Rishma, I don't know if you agree that they couldn't believe that most essential workers in the U.S. have no paid sick time as a condition of employment. And the idea that
our doctors are heroes, unbelievable.
Yeah, it's just like insane. And that's why Angeli Rodriguez from McDonald's contracted COVID, because when she started feeling sick, she couldn't afford to stay home. And our broken immigration policy doesn't allow undocumented workers to stick their heads up and go get health care because of the concerns under the last president, not the current president, of being reported to ICE. So the intersection of all these issues, it's time for it to get addressed by allowing people to join together in unions, fixing broken immigration, and dealing with childcare and healthcare policies and paid leave.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think we have a tremendous opportunity here. It's, I think part of it, as you know, as an organizer, it's just people are so tired.
Yes.
And how do you actually provide community and sisterhood? I was thinking this morning about seeing, the Poland mothers leaving the baby carriages for the Ukraine mothers that were, and it's that image, right? It's like that sense of like, coming together right now is in this moment is, I think, an opportunity. Gerard, the MEDEF represents the French private sector. Could you tell us where French private companies stand in terms of professional equality, and what has been the impact of the pandemic on professional equality in France. I also want to remind everybody to put your questions in the chat, please. We want to hear what you think.
Well, France is today #1 in the world in terms of women participation in the boards of companies. We have, in our 120 biggest companies, we have more than 45% women in our boards, and this is #1 in the world. And I think that what Marie just said before, you know, in France, we have this sentence, which is, on nettoie les escaliers à partir du haut. You clean the stairs from the top and not from the beginning. Mm. And that's the story. That's the real story. I mean, I have no lesson to give because I know pretty well the States. The situation is not the same. The social history is not the same for evident reasons. But to clean the stairs from the top is very useful. And now that we have this, because this is done by law, now you have to have more than 40% of the board members who are women. And this will come to the exec committee. I was in a very large company where we had we were 7 in the exec committee. 2 of them were women. This is not enough, but we are on progress. And I think that, again, if in each company, if you have at the top women like 50% of each, it's good. It's a good image for the company, of course, but it's not the question of image. It's the day-to-day life which changes. So this answers your question in the sense that, yes, we are making more and more things, even in medium-sized or startups, where if you take, you may know all, and this will be the end for this time because I don't want to be too long. You may know that we have the biggest incubator in the world called Station F, where we have more than, I think it's 5,000 companies, startups. But if you go there, you can go and visit it, and I'll be happy to invite you there. But roughly, when you go around, it's 50% guys and 50% girls. And this is good news because I know we're not talking about the basic work of, as it was said before, hospitals or cleaning or education. But, you know, it's a question of signal that you give. And the private sector gives that signal that, yes, we are committed. And it's more than that. In my own task force, you were talking about the task force I'm chairing. We have 420 companies there. And I have an exec board bureau, as we say in French, of 6 vice presidents. I have 3 ladies and 3 guys, and they're all either CEO or vice CEO of a company, and it's a signal that we give to all the companies. I think we have to do more on that, and come and visit France. We'll be happy to show you, but you know it by heart. But it's not to say, and that's my last sentence, that France is better, because again, it's a question of history. The French Revolution was made in particular by women, if you remember the reality about our history. So it's a long haul system, you know, evolution.
Thank you for that. It's very helpful. Dawn, I want to come back and talk a little bit about childcare again, because it seems as we all roads lead back to childcare. You know, in the United States, most Americans spend more on their childcare than their mortgage. I mean, it is unbelievably expensive. And, you know, culturally, we've often talked about childcare as like it's your personal problem, but we're recognized that it's not your personal problem. It is an economic issue. Talk to me a bit about, you know, how is this discussion being had in Canada, around affordable childcare. You talked about what's happening in Quebec, but, why is it so important, for some of the tools available to policymakers to talk about this so we can start closing participation gaps? Is it the government only? Is it the private sector? Is it both? What's the opportunity here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is certainly both, because you're going to need a lot of childcare. But having said that, and this is a statistic I personally like, because it does kind of, to me, round it out to say, okay, if women in Canada had the same participation rate as men, that would add $100 billion to our economy every single year. So it's not, this is something just for women, it's for everyone, right? You're going to grow the pie. And if you grow the pie, then everybody's, going to get a little bit more. And when we think about other things that governments are doing, and the pandemic, I think, you don't want to say that it really created some good things, but in a sense, shining the spotlight on these issues that are keeping women from participating. And now as we look forward, as people say, okay, well, I kind of want to make a pivot here, government policies that put in reskilling or upskilling and really trying to concentrate on getting people back into the labor force, because in Canada, and I know it's true in the States too, but, we have a record number of vacant positions. So, there's a lot of demand for this labor. Now, in Canada, as you know, we're very reliant on immigration. We had a kind of a timeout, obviously, during the pandemic. So, there are gaps that are going to be filled by people coming to Canada, but we also need women to be, working to the same extent as their male colleagues. So again, those are the types of things, but also, just this idea of actually being able to train for something. So government programs are coming up, and businesses too, I think, certainly are really trying to put a lens on how can we help our employees, migrate throughout the firms. Because in Canada, to the point about on boards, at senior executive levels, we're still running, at about a third. So lots of room to grow there. So certainly, at the company RBC where I work, they are doing a lot on that type of thing, trying to get, careers launched. So early employees, but also senior women getting the mentorship and the leadership capabilities developed so they can take on these roles as we move forward.
Thank you for that. Mary-Kay, speaking to your work at SEIU, we, as you mentioned, we have been seeing workers organizing, demanding unions across the industry. We saw it at Google, we saw it at Starbucks, we saw it at Amazon, from tech workers to fast food workers and beyond. And when you do look at the leadership, it's a lot of women, leading this fight. And this was happening even pre-pandemic, right?
Yes.
And the pandemic seems to have just lit a match underneath that. Why has this movement though created fire? And how can businesses support their workers? And are you hopeful that we will win? Because we didn't have as many wins. And I mean, we as in workers organizing to get unions or to get support. What do you see it changing? What's the opportunity?
Yes, absolutely. I see it changing. We see more and more workers who are fed up, and I think have decided, given what they've been through in terms of life-threatening decisions, to be on the front lines of the pandemic without the proper personal protective equipment, without paid sick leave, without affordable childcare, without all the things that this panel has already discussed. People want to take matters into their own hands and join together and make demands to respect us, protect us, and pay us. And I was thinking about the childcare workforce as you and Dawn were talking about childcare. Again, that's the most undervalued and underappreciated job in America alongside of fast food and home care. It was written out of labor laws. Childcare workers have no access to our Social Security system. We have to fight state by state to get them covered by minimum wage laws in some cases. But together, when they join together in a union, we can raise standards. And so when the government invests in affordable childcare, we want that connected to the ability for working women to be able to join together in unions and bargain a better life and continue to work with employers and our government to write these jobs that were excluded back in the 30s in. And that's what we think is really critical to being able to create the solutions and spur other change across the economy, especially for Black, Brown, immigrant, and Indigenous women who've been excluded for far too long.
Mary-Kay, for example, in like the paid leave fight here in the United States, a lot of salaried workers got paid leave, but we left a lot of hourly workers behind.
Yes.
What do we do differently to make sure that doesn't happen?
I think we can allow the federal government to set the floor for states and then for states to build up. And we can make sure that major employers send a signal. I thought what Gerard said about the French private sector sends a signal to what the standard is. Imagine if that could be the US private sector's sending a signal that we want paid leave for every worker, whether hourly or salaried, and to allow those hourly workers to be able to join together and create a permanent solution to high quality union jobs across service and care.
Yeah. Gerard, you've been working internationally during COVID-19. What would you tell us about the impact of the pandemic abroad and the part played by women during the crisis worldwide? One of the things that struck me as an Indian American woman is what was happening in India, and seeing women for the first time start demanding, wages for housework. And that actually shifted. And you've been seeing very interesting movements, especially on being paid for unpaid labor, which we know around the global world, women are the ones who are doing, which gets in the way of their paid work. So yeah, what have you seen? Oh, you're on mute.
Here we are. Am I back?
You're
Thank
back.
You. Well, in a sense, I think the pandemic has, it made a shock in all these countries because women, for instance, if you talk about Africa, or you don't know that in pretty each of the 54 countries of Africa, there's an association, national association called Urban Poor, which gathers all people living in informal settlements, let's say like it, which is around 50% of the towns, right? And 50% of the economy. All, I say all, 100% of these Urban Poor Association, national, are chaired by women. And the good news is that when they come to UN Habitat or all international organization and say, this is what we are facing, when they come to see us in different programs, in the COP26 or in any type of conference, they can tell, look, guys, you man, you're a French man, we know what we need, and we want you to do so. And the pandemic gave them kind of more responsibilities, but also more certainty on what was the best for their own countries. And it's clear that we were talking about India. In India, this is exactly what happened. Exactly. But you can go everywhere. If you listen to the lady mayor of Mexico, Mexico is now more than 20 million inhabitants, as you know. When you hear to Claudia Sheinbaum, when she talks about the problem of the city and the different networks she had with women organizations in Mexico, she knows what she's talking about. And you can't say, you don't know a thing about your city. Of course, a businessman will never say that, but he wants to have a market with. But that's not the real solution. I think that it gave, with this horrible pandemic, it gave one good shot, which is the people who knows about how to deal with this pandemic on a day-to-day basis are the ladies who are operating the city. And this is key for the future.
Thank you for that. We think ladies running everything is the key to every future. But we love to have everyone close out. We have a couple more minutes. As just a closing thought, one of the things, people always say, never waste a good crisis. Actually, before I do that, I'm seeing some questions. One question from JC Ajit: what is the mayor of Mexico doing for femicides in Mexico and making work safe for women there?
I think I'm supposed to answer that question. I think it's a very good question. And I'm not saying that because the mayor is a woman, life will change the next day. We know that criminality in Mexico and in a lot of countries is very high. Thank you for the question, but can I say that criminality is I'm afraid is even in Europe is not gender driven, if I can say so. Yes, there are more feminists, that's another story. But the situation of criminality and security in all the countries, I'm afraid to say that whether it's women or men who are mayor or governors, doesn't change that much. I know this is not the answer. The guy or the lady who asked the question is looking for, but that's the reality I'm facing each single day wherever I go in each continent.
Thank you for that. Why don't we close up, and just one final note. So I want to hear your last thoughts. They say this, we're almost on the 2-year anniversary of the pandemic. I think a lot of us are thinking about where we were actually this week. And there's this line, they say, you should never waste a good crisis. And so when it comes to, women's labor market participation, when it comes to gender equality, what is the opportunity that we have? What's the one thing or two things that you would change? Why don't we just go with Dawn, Mary Kay, and then Gerard? Dawn, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I think it is very much this idea that a spotlight now has been put on a very critical issue that, women have known about for quite a long time. But I think we've really seen a groundswell of support because people do realize that if women are not participating in the labor market, your economy, it just can't grow as robustly as it could with women. So it's whether it's figuring out ways to elevate women in terms of they get into a job, how do we ensure that the path towards a senior leadership role is smoother, is easier? Or again, just getting women really involved in the labor market at all, making sure that those barriers are really eliminated. I think that's really, we all know it should be done. I think we just shining that light on these issues really is what we have to keep the light bright.
Thank you. Mary Kay?
Thank you. I think when you look at entering year 3 of this pandemic, and we've discussed that workers' demands and women at the front of that have only gotten louder and louder about what needs to change. And I really think corporations and the private sector employers have to meet this moment, no matter how big or small they are. And we have a moral obligation as a nation and globally to make sure that our governments, and in our case in the US, the president and Congress and state legislatures, are going to pass policies that either hold corporations accountable or establish a floor that allow women workers the support and structure they need to return to work. And for us, that includes allowing women workers to join together in unions, where our vision is that working people, and especially women of color who have borne the brunt of this pandemic and have held us all up during the pandemic, are at the center of getting a seat at the table to bargain a better life. If we have women mayors that are making differences around the globe, as Gerard has said, and women could make $100 billion in Canada if they had the same participation as men, we need women women workers and in the service and care sector empowered through unions to create a fair and inclusive economy for the first time in the history of the United States.
Thank you. Gerard, I'll let you have the last word.
Well, what a responsibility. No, I would say that I will take back my story of the stairs, saying that you have to clean them from the top, but we still have to do a lot of things in Europe and in France at the back of the stairs, because what the pandemic really showed is that the essential services workers, I was talking about, the day-to-day in health sector, in food distribution, in personal assistance, in cleaning, these people are a majority. In majority, they are women. And this is where we still have to do a lot of, I would say, progress. Still, we're on progress. But when I say that the COVID made it clear for everybody that all the hospitals in France are working with women. By the way, my daughter is a medical doctor, and so she will tell more than what I do, than what I can do. But certainly, now that the stairs are, I would say, more clean at the top of it, we have to accelerate what we understood with the COVID, which is that we have to go down the stairs. And we are clearly with the unions, we are clearly in our way to have a real progress in the coming month, I would say.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for a fantastic panel. I'm frozen at the right time. So great. I think we're on to our next event. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.